Yeah,
Janice
Janice.
to join us.
Yep,
I don't know if she's
she's
the
on.
black box. That's the black box.
Janice.
Okay.
Janice Dean. If you look at the participants, you can see. So hi,
Oh, okay.
Janice.
Hi, Janice.
Hi, everyone.
All right.
Hello.
So I have a few things on the agenda today. It looks longer than it really actually is. So the first, I think we can address this here. So is with respect to the social currency metric system and the naming of it. So there was a question with respect to trademark and the movement towards trademark. So then, yeah, this is just kind of an update for you too. So we had talked to Mike Dolan at the Linux Foundation just about kind of the impacts of trademark, you know what I mean, and what it means within open source communities. And his recommendation, the recommendation that came was to rename social currency metric system within the CHAOSS project. And so the issue is that for social currency metric system and trademark, you have to be clear on the provenance of where that name comes from. And so to help disambiguate the provenance of that name, it would be smart to have SCMS live in kind of in your space, so the provenance is clear that the name comes from there. And CHAOSS can still work with the methodology and all that kind of stuff, but it's just a rename in the CHAOSS project.
Okay. Yeah, and to kind of give you an update, Dylan, myself, and the lawyer that we were speaking with in and of itself, they wanted to confirm whether or not we were actually, like, one, the application information never actually got submitted, and two, the reasoning for the submission way back in like 2017, 2018 was because we weren't sure if the licensure of the system was wholly safe when we were just saying, okay, yes, it's a Creative Commons attribution. So that's what we had originally placed on the system. And we're like, okay, is this really gonna work? Is this gonna protect us for a business? And then it was brought up that we add a trademark to it. And we went through the entire process. We went right up to payment. And I don't know nor remember what happened, but we never actually ended up paying for that in any way, shape, or form.
Totally.
The way
totally
that it was
fine.
set, though, was the social currency metric system, like terminology, was not going to be a part of it. It was just going to be a part of the marketing materials and the logo. So the system as a whole would remain open, but the logo / branding / marketing of it would go under trademark. And that doesn't matter right now because there isn't one. But Dylan and I have kind of made the decision more or less that trademarking it at this point in time seems like it would hurt the business more than anything else. And we would revisit it if ever an issue happened. Because neither Dylan or I are legal people. Like, we're marketers and anthropologists and community managers, so we really don't care. So I don't think a trademark is going to happen in the future. If it did happen, it would just be on the marketing designs.
So to jump in here, what I'm hearing you say is that you would actually prefer us to keep the name.
I'm telling you,
CHAOSS.
keeping the name would have absolutely no ill effects on our side. And it's entirely up to you whether or not you want to change it or keep it. The only thing that we ask is that the attribution still remain because of the Creative Commons attribution. For sure. So, like, this is based off of this system. I don't really care what you name it or anything like that. Just basically say, hey, this is where it's sourced from.
So what Mike also said is if there is a trademark, then we that with the open source projects, the way the Linux Foundation usually does it is to assign the trademark to the project if the name is important. Otherwise, he gave the example of Docker, where Docker had a specification for the containers. And when they moved it to the Linux Foundation, they wanted to continue to have the Docker name under their control. And so the open source project actually was then called the Open Container Specification.
Initiative.
Yeah,
Doesn't
Open
matter.
Container Initiative, OCI. And the technology is the same. They just changed the name to make sure Docker continued to be able to say, hey, this is the Docker stuff. And so if you want to continue using social currency metric system in your marketing materials and everything, the cleaner way would be to say, hey, CHAOSS has the same method. But even if you make changes and you call it social currency metric system because that's what makes sense for your business, you can use that name and we would not muddy the waters for you. We just call it something else. We help, continue to advance it and so on.
Yeah, totally fine with that.
Process.
It's yours now. Like, just make it whatever you want. You can rename it. You can change the systems in any way, shape, or form. But when we built the system, we stood on the shoulders of giants. And in this kind of same respect, you do too. So I guess what I'm trying to say is you have 100% full freedom. You can change it. You don't have to change it. You could do whatever. There's no sweat off our backs on our side.
So my recommendation is to change it in the CHAOSS system so that we don't run into an issue in the future. That if you want to use SCMS, then it is completely disambiguated from the CHAOSS project. And because the thing that Mike had said too was there are a couple things. One is trademark actually starts with business use. So when was SCMS first used? It's not even sometimes about doing the registration, right? And so that can actually play a role. And again, if you can't provide provenance, if SCMS is something that you're using and is coming from the CHAOSS project, then actually getting a trademark is probably not even going to be possible because you can't source the provenance of this terminology. So I think from the CHAOSS perspective, it's better if we just find a new name within the CHAOSS project, leave SCMS where it's at.
Cool.
So that's my recommendation.
Sounds like there's a decision made.
Okay. Well, I think it's a decision guided by our limited understanding of trademark. So
I'm gonna level with you. Pretty much anytime we start talking like legal or anything like that, I'm just like, I don't know.
Oh, I'm not a lawyer. Georg's not a lawyer. Yeah. So we're just trying to follow the advice and avoid muddy waters down the road. That's all, the best that we can.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
of course, attribution is.
We approached this with how could we make it as easy as possible for you, and like, as from our end, from our side, we don't see any problems in any way, shape, or form. But if you want to be safe, do as your community's lawyer has requested.
Did you have something to, Georg?
I just wanted to say that the attribution, I heard it.
Oh, yeah.
We will definitely credit you and Dylan and Socially Constructed Online with the creation of this method. So, yeah.
Cool.
All right, cool. So we have some guests or new people on the call today. And so there's been some efforts about coordinating CHAOSS work with UNICEF. So I'm going to actually turn it over to somebody other than me who can speak to this a little bit and kind of where things are at and what the hope is from UNICEF's perspective. You know what I mean? Just kind of where
Yeah,
we're at
so
and what moving forward.
So from a basic perspective, we've shared chaos metrics that help to illustrate some of the things that UNICEF is interested in measuring, which are fundamentally the public good or the public goods that are generated by open source software. And I'd like to ask, UNICEF to join in and correct or clarify what I'm doing. So we've put together an instance of Augur with Justin Flory. And they've also got some collaboration going with Liturgia because they probably need more professional services than my group can offer. My hope with their participation here is we have this new focus area called social value. And I think that many of the things that have been defined as things to measure to sort of pull out the social value of the software beyond the technology itself have been really well thought out by UNICEF. And so I think that gives the CHAOSS project an opportunity to create metrics that directly relate to the things they want to monitor. I think it gives UNICEF a chance to understand how looking at some of the real simple atomic metrics like number of commits, number of pull requests, issues, don't necessarily paint a picture of project health, that often it's more complex than that. And the participation in the value group, I think, would be super helpful for getting that social value focus area off the ground. And in fact, we think, my opinion is UNICEF is far more experienced in determining or identifying what those kinds of things are than I would be, or any, well, at least I can speak for myself, than I would be. So that's kind of the introduction, and I will let the UNICEF representatives tell me how close I am and maybe express what they're thinking about exploring when they are decided to explore today's meeting.
Sure. Thanks, Sean. Hi, everyone. My name is Victor Grauserat. I'm the technical lead for the Digital Public Goods Alliance, and I'm joined by my colleague Janice. Let her introduce herself. Very quickly, some months ago, the UN Secretary General convened a group of very important people, let's leave it at that, who eventually generated a report who said one of the recommendations was there should be a multi-stakeholder alliance promoting open software, open data, open content, and open AI models. And so this alliance was formed with the support of the government of Norway. And we are currently working, trying to translate what this sort of one sentence from the UN Secretary General means and how we operationalize it. So one of the most recent work streams, and that's an interaction that we had with Sean and Matt, was let's try to put down this to some form of a standard that we can all agree and rally about and say, if a project meets this standard, we can categorize it as a digital public good. We had some previous runs, like back in the spring, we did sort of a pilot with projects focused on early grade reading. So I'd say we looked at a dozen projects. Half of them were purely content, so that's children's books. The other ones were more apps, like software that teach kids how to read. And we looked a lot at the CHAOSS metrics and tried to pull very specific metrics, trying to assess the health of those projects. But we ended up with a 50 plus sort of checklist that it took us sort of, we realized that the process was, say, too involved at that point. So we're trying to, we compress that to 9 indicators right now. And I know that we are brushing off a lot of the details that CHAOSS is focusing on, but hold that thought. And one of the goals that we have right now is sort of to streamline the process of vetting and have a faster way of saying, well, this is a digital public good. And then we will go into deeper reviews by people that are, so we're trying to make a vetting process that is more general, and we can almost outsource or involve the community where we do not need necessarily too specific knowledge, and then do more of in-depth reviews on those projects that we think where we can add more value or can make a bigger impact. And that's where I think we would be looking at more specific indicators like the ones that we might be discussing in this group. I don't want to get too much into detail anywhere, but I think that that's sort of a good enough overview for now. Janice? Can't hear you.
Or you might be muted, Janice.
I know she's having some troubles connecting to this Zoom room for some reason.
I think it might be. If the host could try to unmute. No, that looks
No,
like
she's.
unmuted.
It's okay.
Okay. Well, hopefully she can hear us, or I can share anything that we discuss if she doesn't. But I think she can hear us. So just briefly, Janice is on the research team. He has a lot of prior experience in international development and working on social impact projects. So that's why also she was very interested in joining this group and providing her input as well.
And some of the, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but in a few conversations that we had, you were able to share a fairly well-developed spreadsheet of the kinds of things that you're concerned about, or that UNICEF has identified as representing some kind of public digital good, and ways of examining that.
Yes. So, well, for context, right now I dropped in the chat this, say, let's call it simplified standard that I was referring to, where we have these 9 indicators, and I guess I think there are 2 points of overlap at this high level, but I think again at some point we want to drill deeper than this, which is the first one is whether a project is relevant to the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals. And just because we're in the UN and the Sustainable Development Goals sort of have to be here, I don't think that necessarily this is the best classification of projects impact, but it's reasonably good, and it's it's fairly well known. So and the other one is on the last the 9 which is do no harm, which we are breaking down in terms of privacy and security and illegal content and protection from harassment and so on. The other thing that I'm going to quickly say is that we put together this version 1.0, and we consulted with, again, Sean, Matt, and others. But the moment that we started applying it to some projects, people are already challenging some of those. And so we are moving, which is, the way it should be, I think. I think that my approach here is let's put out something and like make it somewhat official so that people pay attention, but then use it as a prompt for getting feedback and iterating the standard. So we have moved now this to a GitHub repo, and we are sort of moving the conversation there. And you'll see, I'm just pasting this other link, that there's a number of requests or people opening issues and say, well, remove this, open that, expand this language, and so on. So this is totally up for, well, it's in the process of being revisited, and we hope to issue a 1.1 soon enough. I don't want to hijack this meeting. I just want to provide this as a context. So happy to, hear what indicators are you considering for for trying to measure the social aspects or the impact on society that some of these software projects that you might be evaluating or that you might be defining the metrics for?
I think we can help a lot. CHAOSS in general can help a lot with things like the use of approved licenses. We have OSI license indicators in Augur. Documentation of ownership is not, it's a little squishy because it's generally, if it's got a good open source license ownership, do you mean who the committers are or who the maintainers are?
Yeah, this is one that has been challenged before, and it's up for discussion. The initial rationale for including this was, let's make sure that I guess there's clear ownership of the project, so that, say, two entities who are disputing ownership of the project do not submit a digital public good nomination and then use that as a way of arguing between each other that so we try to protect ourselves from getting in the middle in between conflicts, but other people pointed out that there are more effective ways of doing that, or this should not really be the way how we address that. Or sometimes there's a community that owns the project, but there's no clear, say, legal entity that formally owns the brand or the trademark or whatnot, and that should not be a counter, or like that should not be.
It's okay that there's nobody that owns the trademark.
Right.
And dependencies is an area that is complex that we're working on in the evolution working group, and I think there's broader interest in risk and other working groups inside of CHAOSS. I don't know that we have metrics currently for documentation. Am I wrong about that?
It's about the document. It's not about the presence of documentation, but it's about like the actual accessibility of the documentation itself.
Right. Okay. I think we do have a metric for that.
But it's not about that broader view of whether or not there's kind of an appropriate amount of documentation, irrespective of how good or bad the documentation is.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. And here we try to spell some of that out, as in, for us, I think we have to set up some sort of benchmark for what good enough documentation is, and we loosely define it as, well, someone not familiar with the project should be able to install and run it or set it up. It's a very loose attempt at trying to establish a metric, which is still it's fairly subjective. But of course, if someone puts up a link that is basically a placeholder, that's by some metric the documentation site exists, but by some other metric it's not useful at all. I know that this is really hard. And the other thing, just quickly highlight, is that we are dealing with software, data, and content. And for some of those, the metrics are the same, and for some of those, they look very different.
Yes.
That's another level of added complexity.
Well, and when we talked about the future of open source as a community a few weeks ago, I think people see the future of open source software, including a broader view of open digital goods of different kinds. I think that was one of the key points that came forward.
That's
there.
good to hear.
So I have a question and maybe a couple thoughts. So one thought, Victor, is that we could help by taking a look, participating in the PRs.
Yes.
That you just posted, that we could kind of help definitely not merge them, but just help in the conversation.
Yes, yes. I would very much welcome that.
Okay, because I think that's something. What's that?
PRs. What PRs?
Pull
So
request.
these, yeah, he had put the
The second
in
link.
the chat
So many. Okay, all right.
there. I
So
just
many
put it in
links.
again.
So many places to put links. All right, yes.
But basically, it sounds like they had done a release of those 9 original metrics, and people are making comments on how the metrics themselves might be more appropriate. Just really quickly looking at the PRs, like it's a language issue, and we might be able to provide some support
Yeah.
in that regard, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, that would be very helpful.
And then, did I catch it right that you have these 9 metrics that you're putting out as potentially a kind of a low bar that could be community source, so that you within your organization wouldn't have to do the review for everything that wants to be a digital public good, because you just probably don't have the resources to do that. But
Correct.
it could be something that could be outsourced or community driven, whatever that structure might look like. Is that right?
Yes. So we have translated these indicators into a long online form that one of the things that I want to document in this repository is exactly how these indicators translate to those questions, and how, like, what specific information are we collecting to be able to assess whether a project meets this indicator or not. And then in parallel, we are thinking on how, let's say, the first handful of projects, we'll probably vet them to learn ourselves how the process works. But from there on, we have some ideas on how to crowdsource some of this validation, as in, say, you know how, say, the Open Voice Mozilla project works, where you can record some things and then you can listen to these things and validate that what you are listening is a good read of the text that it is in written form. So similarly, we can establish a similar process where you say, this project has provided this link for a documentation. In your opinion, does this documentation, say, for someone not familiar with the project, allows for installation and setup? And if you have, and then we set a threshold, so if 6 people or X number of people not affiliated with the project agree that the information provided meets when setting the indicator, then we vet them positively, right? So we are working on developing that infrastructure and possibly incentivizing it as well. Like, the community might want to do it for good, like as a contribution to the community, or we might be able to add sort of a layer of incentivization. That's ideas that we are tinkering with. So yes, that's sort of how we plan to use this standard or this information.
Okay. So I'm going to ask a question based on what you had just said too, or maybe make a statement. So in terms of the process, we have set something up similarly in the CHAOSS project around diversity and inclusion event badging.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have a series of metrics for events, and those metrics are things like family friendliness. They're things like an event code of conduct. They're a set of 5 metrics, the way that you have 9.
Yep.
And we're using a process in GitHub by which people can apply for a badge. So in your case, it would be apply to be recognized as a digital public good. And the review process is done by reviewers who are volunteering their time to kind of ensure that what the event in our case, or what the project in your case is claiming to be true, actually is.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're doing this in the public with an effort to help events if they need guidance on things like, say, code of conduct, or they need things like on diversity access tickets. And this is actually a model we followed from somebody else. His name's Arfon Smith at the Journal of Open Source Software. So it's this open and transparent process that can be kind of community driven in a way that when you make an application as a project or an event, the reviews are also open and transparent, and a decision is made amongst many people in an open way. And so this may be, I can point you to that.
Yes, that's exactly, like in essence is what we have in mind. We have not yet gone to the point of think about how we will implement, but conceptually, this is exactly what we want to do.
Exactly, because ours isn't quite like what Arfon had done. We had to tailor it a little bit to suit our needs, and maybe likewise you would have to tailor it a little bit, the process. So I'll share that with you. The other question that I had was, did I hear you right by saying that there may be a review process that involves more than the 9 indicators, that would be a more in-depth analysis of particular projects? Was that?
Yes, yeah. So the analogy that we do here is with the Michelin guide. If you are familiar with how that rates restaurants, where you have a guide that, like, all the restaurants in the guide meet some basic criteria, but then Michelin sends these undercover reviewers to a restaurant, and they go really deep, and maybe they assign 1, 2, or 3 stars, and that's where sort of highlights some of those. So similarly, or analogously, we establish what we call these communities of practice, which are groups of people that are very involved in a specific sector, and they bring this sector expertise. Right now we have, I think, 4, 1 on early grade reading, 1 on digital health, 1 on climate adaptation, and 1 on financial inclusion, where we take, say, between a handful and a dozen projects and drill deeper, and that's where the outcome of those groups is more opinionated reviews about, okay, these projects are really good, or making a difference, or show the potential for great social impact change because of this. And that is sort of more free form, but I think that if we can provide, I think that some metrics will emerge as a result of those groups, because those groups will say, well, we back our opinions because we observed that these projects meet these additional criteria or these additional metrics. So while those groups are not framing their work in this way, I personally think that they will evolve towards finding some commonalities that can be more objectively measured and verified.
And I think to Matt's point, the one idea is the way that we did the badging program for identifying some of these items are obviously not identifiable through trace data, and having some kind of peer review process for relevance to sustainable development goals. Or
to me, it sounds like having a rubric system / criteria that is public and allowing people to build their systems to comply and then submit a request for a third party to review it would work a lot better, because then you'd be able to break it down by sub criteria. You'd be able to award different levels based upon how thorough that criteria is, without having to get into the nitty gritty of, do you comply with X rule?
Yeah.
So Venya, is the idea to make the rubric publicly available so that people kind of know how to think?
So
okay.
For RescueNet, it's an LGBT nonprofit that I used to participate in. We had something called the Closet Friendly Status Initiative, which was essentially an initiative where we would go to partner LGBTQ organizations, and we would award them a set of sub certifications based off of a very publicly set rubric